I tell you, Lucas and Noel, you guys are in for an adventure. I remember when we were giving our presentations, getting ready to go out to the Czech Republic, and you have this full sense of anticipation of what the Lord is going to do, and you have no idea what you're in for and what faith and courage you're going to need, and the excitement of how the Lord is going to show you more things about what He's capable of. My goodness, I'm so glad you're going over to such a place as that. Wow. Well, we're in part 2 of 3 of the book of Esther. And the reason we're looking at this scripture is not only that it's really, really fun to walk through the entire book of Esther. I've tried to add a little bit of drama to that by adding in a few extra accents, and please forgive me if I use your accent incorrectly. It's just to add a little bit of flavor to the book. But we want to look at this book because often we don't see God in our lives. And we feel like asking, what the heck? That's not fair. Where are you, God? Have you? Are you experiencing something like that in your life? A sense of stress that is building because you don't know what the end looks like yet. You don't know what changes are coming. You don't know how things are going to work out for you. I shared with you moments in my life where you can see my scars. I've had 3 surgeries in my life, and I keep going to heaven piece by piece. And the Lord takes out more and more of what I apparently don't need. And sometimes I feel like asking, what the heck? That's not fair. You may be going through situations in your job. It may be just like in this story, somebody gets promoted over top of you. Do you remember the character in the story that this is after? Those that were here last week are going to need to help refresh Joe, who wasn't here last week, and we didn't get a recording, which is fine because it leaves more tension and excitement. You guys can do your work. All right. Help me, what are the characters in the book? Who's the first character we get introduced to in this book? Xerxes. And what are some of the things we learned about his character? He's drunk, yeah. Guy loves his wine. He really loves his wine. Hang on to that piece. It's really important today to catch the sense of drama and heightened moment in the story. Loves his wine. Throws parties. Loves parties. What else do we know about him? He likes to show off his wife. And what happens when his wife says, I'm not doing what you say?
She's not his wife anymore.
She's not his wife anymore. That's pretty important. When the wife says, you're kind of stupid there. You're a little bit too drunk. When the wife stands up to Xerxes, she becomes no longer his wife, which is what happened to Queen Vashti. Okay? And also, he listens to whatever his advisors say. At first, his advisors say, well, just get rid of your wife and hold a beauty contest and get a new wife. Then, do you remember the other character? Who's the bad guy, the central bad guy in the story? There's Mordecai and Haman. Haman, okay. And Haman, what do we learn about Haman? Do you remember his character? He's a manipulator. Okay, he lies. He's a manipulator. He is an Agagite, which is a descendant of King Agag, which he was king of the Amalekites, who have been like forever enemies of the Jews. And there's a whole backstory there that we'll get to next week because it sets up the closing chapters for us. But this guy is a longtime enemy of the Jews, and he is a manipulator. He is a manipulator, and he thinks he is at the top of the heap. And do you remember the plot twist? Let's introduce, I guess, the third character here. Who's the other fella in the story? Mordecai? Who's Mordecai? Yeah, Esther's cousin, uncle, dad, right? Okay, he's technically the cousin who serves as an uncle, but is like the dad to Esther. And he appears to be a guy, even though, again, the word God is never mentioned in this book outright. God is never named in this book, which makes it one of the weird books of the Bible. And Martin Luther said, I'm not sure this thing should actually be in the Bible because God is never mentioned. Mordecai seems to be someone who fears the Lord. And how does he feel about Esther? He's very protective of her. Yeah, because this daughter Esther, who's another name for her in her original language is Hadassah. And she is one of the ones that gets selected to be in the beauty contest. Somehow she wins the beauty contest in 127 provinces from India all the way to Ethiopia. She wins the beauty contest and becomes the queen. And how did she become queen? What are some of the characteristics about her, about how she became queen? Besides the fact that she's drop dead gorgeous. Of beautiful form and features, the original says. When Mordecai says, what was the key drop? Do you remember that? Don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. That's going to be important. It was like a key drop, a moment of foreshadowing in the early text that builds up to today. Nobody except Mordecai knows that she's a Jew. And she doesn't tell anybody because Mordecai said so. She does what her uncle says. And then when, time for the glasses. This thing I'm not quite used to yet. Joe already beat me to it, right? All right, here we have Haggai. When Haggai gives her advice about how to do the beauty treatments and what to bring before the king to impress, she follows his advice. She's a girl that follows the advice of wise counselors around her. So she follows advice. Hang on to that. That's going to be really important today. And one last piece. What was the plot twist in the middle there? Mordecai hears about a plot. Two guys want to assassinate King Xerxes. He tells Esther. Esther tells the king. They take these guys, and how do they kill them? They hang them. That's the polite word. They impale them. is what on a large stick. And those guys die. It's written down in the book of the annals of the king. And who gets promoted? Mordecai and we say, what the heck? That's not fair. God, where are you? Mordecai is the brave one, and this enemy of the Jews gets promoted? What's going on with that? And not only that, Mordecai won't bow down to Haman. And it's this silent sense of Mordecai is a Jew who isn't going to bow down to this other guy because he respects God, who isn't mentioned. Haman is so mad that he wants to get rid of Mordecai. But not only Mordecai, he's a Jew, and then he's like, all his DNA comes up, and he goes, Jews, I need to get rid of all the Jews. What can I do? So he comes up with this plot to have on this, is it the 7th of March, I think it is? He rolls the dice, the Purim, and the lot comes up on March 7th. Nearly a year later, they're going to have all the enemies of the Jews can surround them and kill them and steal all their property. And he presents this idea to Xerxes, and Xerxes goes, hey, that sounds like a good idea. Just go ahead and write a letter to all my 127 provinces, and off you go. And the letter is circulated in the citadel of Susa. And Haman and the king sit down for a drink of wine. They're really happy about their big plan. And the entire citadel of Susa is bewildered. What is going on here? Everybody is saying, and forgive me if this is slightly uncouth, but just to let it be a dramatic moment, what the heck? That's not fair. God, where are you? Where are you? Here we pick up in chapter 4. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city. By the way, I'm reading from the NLT. It's the book that has all the notes in it for me to read from when I got a chance to share this previously. So you can follow along with your version in front of you as well. He put on burlap and ashes and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. Ready? And this is probably some... I can't do that tongue thing, that they do in the Middle East. You guys can practice that later, okay? He is wailing because this is like, okay? Very, very bad. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate while wearing clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and... because this is pretty serious stuff. And many people lay in burlap and ashes. And as you read that, remember we said there's some missing pieces, and this is one of the missing pieces. Normally when it says fasted, it's they fasted and prayed to. But here it says they fasted and wept and wailed. And we go, well, normally you'd be talking to God at a moment like this. Aren't you? It's like God is left out on purpose to get our attention to the fact that sometimes it feels like God isn't there. When Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She sent clothing to him. So he's out at the gate. She sent clothing to him and told him to replace the burlap, but he refused it because he can't come into the palace when he's dressed like this. He refused it. Then Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was in mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai into the square in the front of the gate. You can kind of picture this drama. They're going back and forth, back and forth. Mordecai told Hathach, him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued to Susa that called for the death of all the Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. Her uncle, whose advice she follows, has told her, go into the king and do what? Say, essentially it's going to be, you stupid buffoon, do you know what you've done? You've sentenced all my people to death. You're going to kill all the Jews? You need to change this. You made a big mistake. However she couches it, that is what she's going to be saying to the king. What happened to the last queen that said, you buffoon, I'm not doing what you say? She's no longer queen. Can you feel this tension in the moment for Esther? Her beloved uncle, dad, cousin, whom she trusts, says you need to do something very dangerous, very stressful. Then Esther told Hathach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die, unless the king holds out his golden scepter. And the king has not called me to come to him for 30 days. So Hathach gave Esther's message to Mordecai. She says, this is dangerous. Very dangerous for me to go. If he doesn't put out his gold scepter when I walk in uninvited, I could die. Not only just get kicked out of being queen, I could die. And how long has it been since Xerxes invited her over? 30 days. I recently was away from my wife for 2 weeks. That was way too long. Xerxes appears to not even have thought of this gal for 30 days. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Well, don't think that for a moment that because you're in the palace you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arrive from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. It's a checkmate moment. Do you feel the looming decision, the courage and faith it's going to take, Esther? And do you see God mentioned when he's not mentioned in here? In verse 14, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief, that's, we even read a little bit, a hint of it in the psalm today, that's God. Deliverance and relief will arise from some other place. God's going to take care of his people, Esther, Mordecai is saying. Are you going to act with courage and faith? Because if not, likely we're going to die, you and me, because I'm your family. And who knows that God has just orchestrated everything for you to be queen at this very moment, to act in faith. So if you've caught all this tension, she said no to her uncle, she could die. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Now, I hope I'm kind of doing the southern accent well, and it make you smile at drama moments. She says, I'm willing to die. But in order to set up for this moment, I want you to fast and for 3 days. She is beginning here to act with courage and faith. Where is God? But she's willing to take a bold step. Now we don't know what it is. Let's see what she's willing to do. On the third day, chapter 5, on the third day of the fast, Esther put on her royal robes to enter, and entered the court of the palace just across from the king's hall. So imagine, she comes in, the doors come open, she's just interrupted her husband who hasn't seen her for 30 days. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance, when he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court. He welcomed her and he put out his golden scepter. After 3 days of fasting and how does that happen? Well, here we go. It's because she's fasting and So Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. And then the king asked her, "Hey, my bonny lass, what do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom." And Esther replied, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for the king." Now, what's smart about that? She didn't roll in and say, "You buffoon, do you know what you've done?" Because what do we know about King Xerxes? Guy loves a banquet. It's probably going to be wine. And so she says, come to a banquet today and invite Haman. Now, there's something super cool embedded here in the text. I told you a little bit about it last week, and the first one showed up last week. It's a weird acrostic. I told you guys how specifically they made copies by hand of the Hebrew Old Testament, such that they never made a mistake and let it be transmitted on. They would always burn and destroy anything that had a mistake in it. We see the name of God, Yahweh. It's 4 letters. YHWH in English, as we transliterate it. And it's already showed up in the speech of Memucan at the beginning of his phrase of 4 words. We see capitalized big letters that would stand out to us if we're reading Hebrew, and we see it in reverse. It's like God was saying, or the author is saying, God is here, and he's about to flip on its head this idea of getting rid of Queen Vashti. God's got a plan. This is the beginning. Well, in here, it shows up, the name of Yahweh shows up in Queen Esther's request. When she says, let the king and Haman come, that's where Yahweh shows up again, the capital letters at the front of each word in the right order of spelling Yahweh. God is here. It's like saying, King, Haman, Esther are coming to a banquet, and there is a 4th person coming. Yahweh. God is going to show up. The king turned to his attendants and said, I then tell Haman to come quickly to the banquet as Esther requested. So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. While they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, Hi, my bonny lass. Now tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom. Here's the moment. Esther replied, This is my request, my deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and to do as I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you, and I will explain what this is all about. She's a smart girl, is she not? She is warming her husband up. She is getting things ready. And there's beautiful irony developing. I tell you, this thing just begins getting faster and faster as the story moves along. Listen to this. Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet. I got invited to 2. I'm like, whoa, with the king. This is amazing. So he left the banquet, and he's so excited. But when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself and went home. Then Haman gathered together his friends and Zeresh his wife, and he boasted to them about his great wealth and his many children, and he bragged about the honors the king had given him and how he had been promoted to all above all the other officials, and he's just like, me, and then I, and then me, and then I, and just very excited about himself. And I'm wearing out my voice. One moment. Well, then Haman added, Mais oui, and that's not all. Queen Esther invited only me and the king himself to the banquet she prepared for us. And she has invited me to dine with her and the king again tomorrow. Then he added, but this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting there in the palace gate. So Haman's wife, Zeresh, and all his friends suggested, well then, you got to set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall. And in the morning, ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king. Well, this pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. Beep, beep, beep. They're setting up the pole. Okay? That night, for some reason, the king had trouble sleeping. They're setting up a 75-foot tall pole. That's a bit of work overnight. The king had trouble sleeping. I wonder why. So he ordered an attendant to bring the book of the history of his reign so he could read it to him. Interesting, what's going to happen? In those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthan and Teresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate King Xerxes. Aye then, what reward and recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? The king asked. Dun, dun, dun. The king's attendants replied, nothing has been done for him, sire. Five years ago, according to the timeline here, we are saying, what the heck? That's not fair. Where are you, God? And at just the right time, they discover this. Now the irony builds. Listen to this. Aye then, who is that in the outer court? The king inquired. As it happened. This is a very purposeful passive verb. There's a whole bunch of them through this chapter, and I'll just point out this one. It just so happened. And it's so passive, it means that something else is acting here. But it's none of the other characters on the planet. As it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to impale Mordecai on the pole he had prepared. He can hear clock, 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 clock coming down the marble hallway. So the attendants replied to the king, Haman is out in the court, sire. Bring him in, the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, Hey, all righty then. What should be done? What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? Haman thought to himself, oh, maybe, whom would the king wish to honor more than me? So he replied, oh, if the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's horses in his own royal robes, and as well as a horse that the king himself has ridden, one with a royal emblem on his head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. And let them see the man whom the king wishes to honor is dressed in the king's robes and led through the city square on the king's horse. Have the officials shout as they go, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. Excellent, the king said to Haman. Quickly then, take the robes and my horse and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Leave nothing out that you have suggested. So Mordecai took the robes and put them on, or Haman took the robes and put them on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square shouting, Marie, this is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. This is what the king does for someone he wishes to honor. Not surprisingly, afterwards Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home dejected and completely humiliated. Completely humiliated. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends what had happened, his wise advisors and his wife said, well, since, how do we do the accent? Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is of Jewish birth, what they mean is, he belongs to. You will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue opposing him. Knock, knock, knock. When they're still talking, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly took Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. And maybe Haman's thinking, oh, at least there'll be good wine there. Is someone at work in this that we're not seeing? 5 years of waiting, and the coincidence happens on the morning when Mordecai was to be hung. What is going to happen? So the king and Haman went to the Queen Esther's banquet. On the second occasion, while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, Aye, my bonny lass, tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it is half the kingdom. Here it is. Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people will be spared. For my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king." And it comes out. We're going to come back to this verse because it's huge. "Hey then, who would do such a thing?" King Xerxes demanded. "Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you?" Esther replied, "This wicked Haman is our adversary, and I am an enemy." Haman grew pale with fright before the king and the queen. And in the NIV, it renders it so clearly for us to understand how upset the king was. It says, "Then the king jumped up and left his wine." He flew to his feet in rage and went out into the palace garden. Haman, however, stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king intended to kill him. There's another acrostic buried in there. Right at that moment, we see Yahweh spelled out in those words. At the end, and it's at the end of the words, and it's also spelled out in reverse to show, again, the enemy of God is coming to his end. Yahweh is here. God's plan began with Memucan when he said, "Hey, we better hold a beauty contest to get a new queen." Here, God's plan is coming to a close. Boom. The king is getting ready to kill Haman, and Haman knows it. In despair, Haman fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining, just as the king returned from the garden. The king exclaimed, "Hey then, will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" As soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Haman has set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to impale Mordecai and the man who saved the king from assassination." I don't know if that guy had been hanging on to that one for 5 years. He couldn't wait to tell. "Then impale Haman on it," the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. And the king's anger subsided. Is it all fixed, though? There's still an edict out there that the king has had sent out to 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia that cannot be revoked. The Jews are going to get killed by their enemies on March 7th. But the king's anger has subsided. How's the story going to end? Come back next week. Or read ahead if you can't be here. But one last thing, just in case you haven't caught the fact that God is here. In chapter 7, verse 5, when King Xerxes demanded who would do such a thing, in the ESV it says, "Who is he and where is he who has dared to do this?" And here we see another name of God spelled out as an acronym. And it's the sense of all these guys see is what's going on in front of their eyes. King Xerxes is wondering, who's the plotter? Who's the plotter? Who's the plotter? Esther knows it's Haman. But here we know it's God versus the enemy of God and his people. We get 5 hidden tips all through the book, clearly laid out for us to see when we don't see God and we're saying, what the heck? That's not fair. God, where are you? The book says, He is right here. He is working. So as you're in your stressful, unknown future, will we have the courage of Mordecai and Esther? And will we have faith to engage in prayer and ask our protector? Because this protector, this name is the same name in Exodus chapter 3 of I am the God who rescued Israel from Egypt. Our deliverer is going to rescue us. He is with us. Will we have the courage and the faith to step out and do what we need to do next? That's all I have to share with you today.